The first sob escaped her in the walk-in freezer, where no one could hear. Megan pressed her palm against her mouth, mascara bleeding onto her fingertips as the cold seeped through her thin uniform. $6 in tips. That's what she had to show for 8 hours of smiles, of yes sirs and right away ma'ams. $6 to help feed Lily tonight. Outside, the diner bustled with the clinking of silverware and murmured conversations. But Megan's universe had collapsed to this, a 29-year-old single mother, shivering between boxes of frozen fries, trying to stifle her breakdown before her break ended. She couldn't know that the quiet man in booth 7, the one with the scruffy beard and worn clothes, was Jacob Reed. Billionaire. CEO. Owner of the very chain that was slowly crushing her spirit. And she certainly couldn't know how her tear-stained face would haunt his dreams for weeks to come. Jacob Reed stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, Toronto's skyline glittering beneath him like a carpet of stars. At 46, he had everything a man could want: a $2.8 billion restaurant empire spanning 3 provinces, a lakeside mansion, and a face recognizable enough to open doors throughout the country. Reed's Diners, where every meal feels like home, had become a Canadian institution under his leadership. Yet something was hollowing him from the inside. "The board meeting's in 30 minutes, sir," his assistant said from the doorway. Jacob nodded without turning. "The quarterly reports. On your desk. And I've highlighted the concerning trends." Concerning was an understatement. Customer complaints had doubled. Online reviews painted a picture of establishments where service was perfunctory at best, hostile at worst. Employee turnover had reached staggering levels, 94% annually at some locations. His regional managers insisted it was just industry standard. "People don't want careers in food service anymore, sir," they'd explain with practiced sympathy. "And customers expect 5-star service at fast food prices." But Jacob remembered washing dishes at 16 in his uncle's kitchen, remembered the pride in doing even menial work well. He'd built Reed's on that foundation, not just good food, but dignity in service. The numbers felt wrong. The explanations felt hollow. "Cancel the meeting," he said suddenly. His assistant looked up, startled. "Sir. Tell them I'm conducting a personal audit of our operations." He turned from the window, his reflection fading as he stepped away from the glass. "And get me the employee records for the Burlington location." "The Burlington location," she repeated. "Any particular reason?" Jacob picked up a complaint letter from his desk. It was handwritten, not an email or social media post like most. An elderly woman describing how she'd watched a waitress be berated until she cried, how no one had intervened, how the food was still good but she couldn't stomach returning. "It's one of our oldest locations," he said quietly. "And one of our most troubled." That evening, alone in his expansive condo, Jacob studied photographs of the Burlington Diner's staff. Most were young, their employment histories showing a revolving door of short tenures. The manager, Rick Donovan, had been there 2 years, an eternity by current standards. His performance reviews were adequate but uninspiring. Jacob's finger stopped on one file. Megan Collins. 29. Single mother. 8 months with the company, longer than average. Previous experience at 3 other restaurants. Taking business courses part-time at the local community college. Her employee photo showed tired eyes attempting a professional smile. Something about her gaze tugged at him. There was determination there, and something else, a dignity being slowly eroded. but there was also an unmistakable beauty that transcended the harsh fluorescent lighting of the HR photo. High cheekbones, expressive eyes the color of warm honey, and a gentle curve to her lips that suggested she once smiled easily, before life had worn her down. Jacob found himself staring at the photo longer than necessary, an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. When was the last time a woman had affected him this way? His brief marriage had ended 5 years ago, his ex-wife unable to compete with his devotion to building the business. Since then, his romantic life had consisted of carefully arranged dates with women who moved in his social circle's connections of convenience rather than passion. He closed the file, unsettled by his reaction. This wasn't about his personal life, it was about fixing a business problem. He was going undercover to observe operations, not to, what? What exactly was he thinking? Jacob walked to his bedroom. He opened his closet, pushing past tailored suits worth thousands until he reached the back wall. There, still in dry cleaner's plastic, hung the clothes he'd worn before wealth had redefined him. Faded jeans, work boots, flannel shirts with fraying cuffs. His reflection in the mirror looked wrong, too polished, too distant from the realities of his own business. That would change tomorrow. Before sleep came, Jacob found himself thinking of the woman in the photo. Megan Collins. A single mother working as a waitress in his diner. What was her life really like? And what would she say if she knew the owner of the company was about to become her customer? The beard was the hardest part. 3 days' growth itched incessantly against Jacob's neck as he drove his rented Honda toward Burlington. He'd forgotten the physical discomfort of stubble after years of professional grooming. The baseball cap pulled low over his eyes felt foreign too, as did the glasses frames without prescription that slightly distorted his vision. But the clothes now, those felt like returning home. The worn jeans and flannel shirt transported him back to his early 20s, when he'd worked the line at his first diner. Before expansion. Before the board of directors and the corner office. Before he'd become a name instead of a person. Jacob caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. The disguise wasn't just about avoiding recognition, it was about remembering who he'd been before success had built walls between him and his own creation. He parked a block away from the diner, his stomach knotting with an unexpected anxiety. When was the last time he'd eaten in one of his own establishments as a regular customer? 5 years? Longer? The Burlington location sat at the corner of 2 busy streets, morning light catching on the red and white sign. From the outside, it looked exactly like the architectural renderings he'd approved, nostalgic without being kitschy, welcoming without trying too hard. But small details betrayed neglect: faded paint on the trim, a missing letter in the neon open sign, fingerprints smudging the glass entry doors. None catastrophic, but all symptoms of something deeper. Jacob paused before entering, suddenly aware of the absurdity and necessity of his disguise. Billionaire CEO pretending to be ordinary. But wasn't that the problem? He'd become extraordinary in all the ways that distanced him from his customers and employees. The bell chimed softly as he pushed open the door. The smell hit him immediately: coffee and bacon and pancake batter, the scent of his childhood and his earliest business dreams. For a moment, the familiarity overwhelmed him. This was what he'd wanted to share with the world: comfort, consistency, care. But the warmth of the scent contrasted with the atmosphere. No host at the entrance. 2 customers at the counter looking irritated, clearly waiting too long for service. A table of 4 by the window, the children fidgeting while parents checked their watches repeatedly. "Just sit anywhere," called a harried voice from behind the counter. Someone will be with you in a minute. Jacob chose a booth with a clear view of both the dining area and the service window into the kitchen. The vinyl seat had a small tear along the seam, another detail that wouldn't appear in maintenance reports but spoke volumes about priorities. He observed silently, cataloging every interaction. The elderly man at the counter who asked 3 times for coffee before receiving it. The family by the window finally getting their food, the mother cutting into pancakes and frowning at the uncooked center. The lone waitress visible, not Megan, according to her name tag, moving with robotic efficiency, her face a mask of exhausted indifference. Sorry for the wait. Jacob looked up. And there she was, Megan Collins. Her employee photo hadn't captured the fullness of her exhaustion. Dark circles underscored eyes that retained kindness despite everything. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, wispy strands escaping around her temples. The standard Reed's Diner's uniform red polo, black pants hung slightly loose on her frame. In person, she was even more striking than in her photo. There was a grace to her movements despite her fatigue, a natural elegance that the utilitarian uniform couldn't diminish. Jacob felt an unexpected flutter in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Coffee to start, she asked, her customer service voice practiced but strained. Please, Jacob replied, studying her closely. Busy morning. Something flickered across her features, surprise at the personal question, perhaps before the professional mask slipped back into place. Short-staffed, she said simply, as if those 2 words explained everything. And perhaps they did. As she poured his coffee, Jacob noticed her hands, elegant despite the chipped nail polish, a small burn scar across one knuckle. Working hands. Hands that told a story of labor and perseverance. He found himself wanting to know that story in its entirety. Can I get you anything else? Megan asked, her pen poised over her order pad. Just the coffee for now, Jacob replied. I'm in no rush. She nodded and turned to leave, but Jacob found himself speaking again. Actually, she paused, looking back at him. What would you recommend? If you were ordering, I mean. The question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, the professional veneer dropped, and a hint of a genuine smile touched her lips. The blueberry pancakes are pretty amazing. With real maple syrup, not the fake stuff. Then that's what I'll have, Jacob said, returning her smile. As she walked away, Jacob found his eyes following her, the straight line of her back, the determined set of her shoulders. He felt a twinge of guilt for the direction of his thoughts. He was here to evaluate his business, not to be captivated by one of his employees. Yet something about Megan Collins kept drawing his attention, even as he tried to focus on the operational issues surrounding him. Mom, my science project is due tomorrow. Megan nearly dropped her phone into the industrial sink where she was washing her hands. What? Lily, you told me it was next week. No, Mom. I told you it was Tuesday. Today is Tuesday, baby. Megan closed her eyes, leaning against the cool metal. The diner's bathroom smelled of bleach and cheap air freshener. Outside, she could hear the clatter of the lunch rush building. Her 10-minute break was already down to 7. I need to make a solar system. With planets and everything. Megan's mind raced through their apartment's meager craft supplies. Construction paper. Maybe some styrofoam balls left from last Christmas. Paint, if it hadn't dried up. I'll help you tonight, okay? As soon as I'm home. She checked her watch. 5 more hours on this shift, then 2 hours at the college library finishing her accounting assignment, then home to create the universe with her daughter before midnight. Promise. Lily's voice was small, uncertain. Mega promise. Galaxy-sized. She forced brightness into her voice. But I have to go now. Is Mrs. Garcia there? Yes. Okay, put her on for a sec. Megan quickly arranged for their elderly neighbor to keep Lily an extra hour, promising to bring home dinner from the diner. Another favor she couldn't afford to repay. When she returned to the floor, table 6, the quiet man with the beard was watching her. Not in the entitled way some men watched waitresses, but with an intensity that made her self-conscious. He'd been there nearly an hour, nursing a coffee, ordering the simplest items on the menu. Usually, she'd be annoyed by a customer taking up a table for so long during the rush. But something about him was different. There was a thoughtfulness in his gaze, a respect that most customers didn't bother to show. Need a refill? She asked, approaching with the pot. He nodded, sliding his cup forward. Thanks. Up close, she noticed details she'd missed before. His clothes were worn but clean. His hands were smooth, not a laborer's hands, but his posture suggested someone accustomed to physical work. His eyes, behind those glasses, held a sharpness that seemed at odds with his unhurried demeanor. And they were kind eyes. Perceptive. The way they crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled suggested someone who laughed easily, though he wasn't laughing now. Everything okay with your food? It's good, he said, though he'd barely touched his sandwich. You seem busy today. She gave the automatic response, we manage. But something in his direct gaze made her add, though another server would make a world of difference. They don't schedule enough staff. The question felt like dangerous territory. Complaining about management to customers was the fastest way to get written up. But she found herself answering anyway. The budget only allows for so many hours. And people don't stay long in this job. But you have. It wasn't a question. I have a daughter, she said, as if that explained everything. And in a way, it did. A daughter meant stability mattered more than satisfaction. A daughter meant accepting Rick's bullying and the endless doubles and the customers who treated her like furniture. He nodded, something in his expression suggesting he genuinely cared about her answer. Not just customer service small talk, but real interest. When was the last time a man had looked at her that way? Not as a waitress, not as a mother, but as a woman with thoughts and feelings worth understanding? She felt a flush creep up her neck, caught off guard by her own reaction. This was ridiculous. He was just a customer being polite, and she was so starved for basic human connection that she was reading too much into it. A commotion at the kitchen window saved her from further conversation. Rick's voice carried across the diner, order up, Megan. Table 9's been waiting. She flinched instinctively, noticing how the bearded man's expression darkened as he registered her reaction. Excuse me, she murmured, hurrying away. The next 2 hours blurred together in a familiar rhythm. Take order, input order, deliver food, refill drinks, clear table, repeat. Her feet throbbed in shoes with wearing soles. Her back ached from carrying heavy trays. But worse than the physical discomfort was the grinding knowledge that this day would be indistinguishable from tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. She was halfway through her business degree. 2 more years, if she could keep up with night classes. Then maybe an office job. Benefits. Regular hours. A life where Lily wouldn't have to remind her about science projects because Megan would be present enough to remember. "Can I get some ketchup? We've been waiting 10 minutes. Megan startled out of her thoughts. Table 12, a middle-aged couple, the woman's voice sharp with irritation. "I'm so sorry," Megan apologized, feeling her face flush. "I'll bring it right away." As she hurried to the condiment station, she passed the bearded man again. He was watching Rick berate the new busboy for a broken glass, watched how the teenager's shoulders curved inward with each cutting word. Something in the man's expression made Megan pause. It wasn't just disapproval, it was recognition. As if he'd seen the scene before, as if he understood its full weight. For a moment, their eyes met, and Megan felt an inexplicable urge to tell the stranger everything about Lily's science project, about her aching feet, about how she sometimes cried in the walk-in freezer because it was the only place Rick wouldn't follow her. Instead, she grabbed the ketchup bottle and hurried on, but not before noticing the warmth that spread through her chest at that brief moment of connection. For reasons she couldn't articulate, she found herself hoping he'd come back tomorrow. The incident began with spilled coffee. Connor, the new cook barely old enough to have graduated high school, bumped Megan's elbow as they passed in the narrow service corridor. The coffee pot tilted, splashing dark liquid across the order tickets in her hand and down the front of her uniform. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," Connor gasped, his face draining of color. "It's okay," Megan said automatically, though it wasn't. The coffee had soaked through to her skin, the heat making her wince. The tickets orders for 3 different tables were now illegible brown-stained pulp. Rick emerged from the office, drawn by Connor's exclamation. He assessed the situation with cold eyes. "Are you fucking kidding me?" he said, voice low but cutting. "Those are active orders, Megan." "It was my fault," Connor interjected. "I wasn't looking." "Did I ask who was at fault?" Rick snapped. "I'm talking to Megan. These are her tickets, her responsibility." Megan felt something crack inside her chest, a small, vital piece of her dignity giving way. She'd been awake since 4:30 a.m., had helped Lily with reading homework before dropping her at school, had taken an online quiz during her morning break, and had been on her feet for 6 straight hours without a real meal. The coffee burned against her stomach, and now Rick's contempt burned against whatever remained of her self-respect. "I'll put the orders in again," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "And tell the customers what? That you're too incompetent to keep their orders dry? That their food will be another 20 minutes because you can't do the most basic parts of your job?" Each question landed like a physical blow. Megan became acutely aware of the other staff watching, of how public this humiliation was. She'd endured Rick's criticism before they all had, but something about today, about the coffee soaking through her only clean uniform, about Lily's science project waiting at home, made it unbearable. "I'll handle it," she managed, trying to move past him. Rick stepped sideways, blocking her path. "No, you'll stand there and listen when I'm talking to you. This is exactly why this location is failing its targets. Sloppy work. No attention to detail. No pride in the job." From the corner of her eye, Megan saw the bearded customer from booth 7 approach the counter, close enough to hear everything. Shame flooded her cheeks. Of all the customers to witness her humiliation, why did it have to be him? The one person who had looked at her with genuine interest and respect? 22 minutes, Rick continued, checking his watch. "That's how long table 14 has been waiting for their food. Now it'll be what, 40? 50? Because you can't keep a coffee pot upright. Something hot and unexpected rose in Megan's throat, not tears, but anger. Pure, clarifying anger that shocked her with its intensity. Maybe if we weren't chronically understaffed, she said, her voice low but steady, I wouldn't be running orders and pouring coffee simultaneously. Maybe if you spent less time criticizing and more time helping during the rush. Excuse me. Rick's eyes widened, unused to pushback. You heard me. The words tumbled out now, unstoppable. I've covered double shifts all week. I haven't had a real break in 6 hours. I'm doing the job of 3 people, and you have the nerve to stand there and question my competence. The kitchen had gone silent. Even the sizzle of the grill seemed to quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Rick's face darkened, a vein pulsing at his temple. That's it? You're done for the day. Go home. And don't bother coming in tomorrow until we've had a discussion about your attitude. The implications hit Megan immediately. Missing tomorrow's shift meant losing a day's wages. With rent due next week and Lily's prescription to refill. Something inside her crumbled. The anger drained away, leaving only the hollow reality of her vulnerability. She couldn't lose this job. She couldn't. To her horror, tears spilled down her cheeks. Not dignified, silent tears, but ugly, choking sobs that bent her forward, hands pressed against her mouth to stifle the sound. Oh, for God's sake, Rick muttered. Now the waterworks. That's enough. The voice came from behind Megan, steady, authoritative, unfamiliar. She turned, vision blurred, to find the bearded customer from booth 7 standing in the service corridor. Customers aren't allowed back here, Rick said automatically. Apparently neither is basic human decency, the man replied, his tone measured but hard. Does corporate know this is how you manage your staff? By humiliating them in front of co-workers when accidents happen. Rick's expression faltered momentarily before hardening again. This doesn't concern you, sir. If you'll return to your table. It absolutely concerns me, the man interrupted. I'm watching a woman who's clearly working herself to exhaustion be berated by her manager for an accident that resulted from understaffing and poor working conditions. That concerns me greatly. Megan stared at the stranger, bewildered by his intervention. Customers occasionally witnessed Rick's outbursts, but they invariably looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to involve themselves. But this man, this stranger with the kind eyes, had stepped forward when no one else would. Had seen her not just as a waitress in a stained uniform, but as a person deserving of dignity. The realization brought fresh tears, but of a different kind. Look, Rick said, forcing a conciliatory tone, I understand your concern, but you don't know the full situation. We have standards to maintain. Standards? The man's eyebrow raised. Let me tell you about standards. They start with how you treat the people who represent your brand. They're reflected in how management responds to pressure. Everything I've seen in the last hour suggests your standards begin and end with bullying those with less power than yourself. Rick's face flushed crimson. Who the hell do you think you are? The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet. He flipped it open to reveal an ID badge with the Reed's Diner's corporate logo. Jacob Reed, he said simply. I own this restaurant. And we need to talk. The kitchen fell silent. A fork clattered somewhere in the background, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. Megan's tears froze on her cheeks as her brain struggled to process the revelation. Jacob Reed. The Jacob Reed. The man whose signature was on her paychecks, whose face appeared in corporate videos during orientation. Here. In their failing location. Dressed like a day laborer. The same man whose gaze had made her feel seen for the first time in months. Whose small kindnesses had brightened her grueling day. The stranger who had somehow penetrated her professional armor in ways she couldn't explain. Rick's complexion shifted from angry red to sickly pale in the space of a heartbeat. "Mr. Reed," he stammered, "I had no idea we weren't notified of a visit." "That was rather the point," Jacob said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "I wanted to see how my restaurants actually operate, not how they perform when everyone knows the owner is watching." Megan became acutely aware of her tear-streaked face, the coffee stain spreading across her uniform, the utter humiliation of having completely broken down in front of not just her colleagues, but the CEO of the entire company. She took an instinctive step backward, wishing she could dissolve into the linoleum floor. Jacob's eyes shifted to her, his expression softening. "Miss Collins, isn't it?" The fact that he knew her name sent a fresh jolt of surprise through her. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely audible. "I'd like you to take your break now. A real one." He glanced at his watch. 30 minutes, minimum. "There's a coffee shop across the street, isn't there? Please get yourself something to eat, on me." He withdrew a $50 bill from his wallet and held it out. Megan stared at the money, unable to move. The situation felt surreal, as if she'd slipped into an alternate reality where billionaire CEOs appeared out of nowhere to rescue waitresses from tyrant managers. But more disorienting than the revelation of his identity was the realization that the connection she'd felt, the way his eyes had seemed to truly see her, hadn't been imagined. There had been something genuine in their brief interactions, a recognition that transcended their vastly different positions. "I can't," she began. "You can," Jacob said gently. "And you will." "That's not a request, Megan. It's a direct order from your CEO." Something in his tone, not unkind, but brooking no argument, finally penetrated her shock. She reached out and took the money, her fingers trembling slightly. As her hand touched his, their fingers brushed for the briefest moment. The contact was fleeting but electric, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. Jacob's eyes widened slightly, suggesting he'd felt it too. "Thank you," she whispered. 30 minutes, Jacob repeated, his voice softer now. "We'll talk more later." As Megan moved toward the exit, Jacob turned his attention back to Rick, whose attempt to regain composure was betrayed by a slight tremor in his hands. "Your office," Jacob said. "Now." The walk across the street felt dreamlike. Megan was vaguely aware of curious stares from customers as she left, of Connor's wide-eyed expression of disbelief, of the weight of the $50 bill clutched in her palm. She ordered a sandwich and coffee at the cafe more by muscle memory than conscious decision, then sank into a corner booth, her legs suddenly boneless. Jacob Reed. Here. Witnessing her complete emotional collapse. She should feel mortified, and part of her did, but another part, a stronger part, felt a surging relief. Someone had seen. Not just seen, but intervened. After months of Rick's escalating behavior, after countless indignities endured because she couldn't afford to lose this job, someone with actual power had witnessed the reality of working at Reed's Diner. And he'd been kind to her even before revealing who he was. The memory of their earlier interactions took on new significance. He hadn't been just another customer making small talk. He'd been evaluating, yes, but there seemed to be more to it than professional assessment. The way he'd looked at her, asked about her, it had felt personal somehow. Megan shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She was being ridiculous. Jacob Reed was a billionaire CEO. She was a single mother waitressing to make ends meet. Whatever connection she imagined she'd felt was just that, imagination. He'd stepped in because he was concerned about his business, not because he cared about her specifically. Yet as she sipped her coffee, Megan couldn't quite dismiss the memory of his eyes when they'd met hers. There had been something there. Something that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchies or professional obligations. Through the cafe window, Megan could see the diner across the street. The familiar red and white sign, the large windows giving glimpses of customers continuing their meals, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the back. She tried to imagine what was happening in Rick's cramped office. Was Jacob Reed firing him on the spot? Was Rick offering excuses, blaming corporate pressure, staffing challenges, the economy? And what would happen to her? Would her outburst cost her the job she desperately needed, despite Jacob's intervention? Or was this the beginning of something else entirely? Her phone buzzed with a text from Connor. "What is happening?" She stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. How could she explain what she herself barely comprehended? Finally, she typed back, taking a real break. "We'll explain later. Is everyone okay?" Connor's response came immediately, "Boss man still in Rick's office. Door closed. Everyone freaking out. In a good way." Megan set down her phone and took a bite of her sandwich, realizing suddenly how ravenous she was. When was the last time she'd eaten a proper meal, sitting down, without rushing? The simple pleasure of it, warm food, a moment of quiet, the absence of Rick's critical stare brought tears to her eyes again. By the time she returned to the diner, precisely 30 minutes later, something had shifted in the atmosphere. Rick was nowhere to be seen. The kitchen staff moved with their usual efficiency but without the tense, hunched postures that typically accompanied the lunch rush. At the host station, Jacob Reed was speaking quietly with Connor, who nodded repeatedly, his expression earnest. Jacob looked up as she approached. Without the barrier of his role as a customer, Megan noticed details she'd missed before. The intelligence in his eyes. The confidence in his posture. The subtle but unmistakable aura of someone accustomed to being in charge. And something else, a flash of something warm and approving in his expression when he saw her. Something that went beyond professional assessment. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Yes," she said, though better barely scratched the surface of the emotional cyclone inside her. "Thank you for the break." "And the meal?" Jacob nodded. "Connor here has been filling me in on some of the operational challenges you've all been facing. I'd like to hear your perspective as well, but first," he gestured toward the dining room, where several tables of customers were finishing their meals, "we still have a restaurant to run." "Is Rick?" Megan let the question hang, uncertain what outcome she was even hoping for. "Mr. Donovan is no longer with the company," Jacob said simply. "I'll be personally overseeing this location for the remainder of the day. Connor has agreed to step up and help coordinate the kitchen. Can I count on you to lead the front of house?" Megan blinked, processing the request. Not an order, a genuine question. A recognition of her capability. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "Yes, you can." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Megan felt that same inexplicable connection from earlier. Only now, Knowing who he was, the feeling was more complex, layered with implications she wasn't ready to examine. The afternoon brought a strange new rhythm to the diner. With Rick gone, an almost palpable tension dissolved from the air. The kitchen staff straightened from their habitual defensive postures. Servers moved with more confidence, their customer interactions warmer, more genuine. Jacob Reed worked alongside them all, expediting orders, bussing tables when needed, observing every aspect of the operation with keen eyes. He asked questions constantly, not with Rick's accusatory edge, but with authentic curiosity. Why was the coffee station arranged that way? What slowed down ticket times during the rush? Which menu items created the most complications? And he kept finding reasons to work near Megan. Helping her with a large order. Asking her opinion on menu modifications. Standing close enough that she could detect the faint scent of his cologne beneath the diner smells of coffee and grilled onions. Each time they worked together, that strange, electric awareness flickered between them. A brush of hands when passing plates. Eyes meeting over a customer's head. Small moments of connection that felt increasingly significant. By the time the dinner shift began, Megan felt as though she'd stepped into an alternate universe, one where her opinion mattered, where problems were met with solutions rather than blame, where the exhaustion in her bones came from honest work rather than emotional defense. And one where Jacob Reed, billionaire CEO, seemed unable to take his eyes off her for more than a few minutes at a time. It had to be her imagination. He was evaluating her work, that was all. Assessing her potential value to the company. It couldn't be personal interest. Men like Jacob Reed didn't notice women like her, single mothers with dark circles under their eyes and coffee stains on their uniforms. At 7, when the evening rush subsided, Jacob beckoned her toward a quiet booth in the corner. "Join me," he asked, his tone making it a request rather than a command. Megan slid into the seat across from him, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance, the coffee stain dried to a brown smudge across her uniform, wisps of hair escaping her ponytail, the mascara long since cried away. "First," Jacob said, "I want to apologize." Of all the ways she'd imagined this conversation beginning, an apology wasn't among them. "For what?" she asked, genuinely confused. "For what happened today. For what's been happening, clearly, for some time." He leaned forward, hands clasped on the table between them. "This isn't what Reed's Diners is supposed to be. Not for our customers, and certainly not for our staff. Somewhere between opening our first location and growing to what we are now, something essential was lost. I failed to see that until today." Megan studied him, trying to reconcile this man, thoughtful, direct, speaking of failure with such openness, with her mental image of a billionaire CEO. The disconnect was jarring. "I've worked in restaurants since I was 16, she said carefully. "They're all challenging environments. But yes, this has been particularly difficult." Jacob nodded. "I saw your personnel file. 8 months here. Longer than most. Why did you stay?" The question pierced something deep inside her. Why had she stayed? The practical answers came automatically: regular schedule, location close to Lily's school, slightly better pay than comparable positions. But beneath those ran something deeper, harder to articulate. "I believed it could be better," she said finally. "The first manager who hired me before Rick, she was amazing. Tough but fair. She made us feel like a team. When things started changing under Rick, I kept thinking it would improve. That someone would notice. A flash of something, guilt. Recognition crossed Jacob's face. Someone should have noticed sooner. I should have. He paused. Your file mentioned you have a daughter. Lily, Megan said, her face softening instinctively. She's 5. Jacob's expression warmed. What's she like? The question surprised Megan. Most people didn't ask about Lily beyond perfunctory inquiries. She's incredible, Megan said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. Too smart for her own good. She asks questions about everything. Right now she's obsessed with space, hence the science project due tomorrow. The solar system, Jacob remembered, and Megan felt a small thrill that he'd recalled that detail from her phone conversation. Yes. We'll be up late tonight with styrofoam balls and paint. Jacob smiled, and the genuine warmth in it transformed his face. I made a solar system in 4th grade. Jupiter fell off on the bus ride to school. Traumatic. Megan laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she genuinely laughed at work? And you're studying business administration? While working full-time and raising her alone. Megan nodded, unexpectedly self-conscious. Put that way, her daily existence sounded either impressive or foolish, she wasn't sure which. Why business? Jacob asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. The question surprised her. No one at the diner had ever asked about her studies, her ambitions beyond serving plates and collecting tips. I want to understand how things work, she said slowly, finding the words as she spoke. Not just how to follow procedures someone else created, but why they exist in the first place. How decisions get made. How systems either support people or crush them. She hesitated. That probably sounds ridiculous to someone like you. On the contrary, Jacob said. It sounds like exactly the perspective this company has been missing. He met her gaze directly. Do you know what I saw today, Megan? I saw a woman handling impossible circumstances with grace. I saw someone who cares deeply about doing things properly. I saw leadership qualities being completely wasted in an environment that should have nurtured them. His eyes held hers, and Megan felt something shift between them. This wasn't just professional assessment. There was admiration there, and something more personal she couldn't quite name. Megan felt heat rising to her cheeks, unused to such direct praise. I just do my job, she murmured. No, Jacob replied firmly. You do far more than your job. You hold this place together despite a system that's been actively working against you. That's not just doing a job, that's demonstrating character. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, sliding it across the table. It was simple, elegant, just his name and contact information, the Reed's Diner's logo embossed in one corner. I'm making changes, he said. Not just at this location, but across the company. The kind of toxicity I witnessed today isn't an isolated incident, it's a symptom of larger problems. Problems I intend to fix. Megan picked up the card, its heavy cardstock substantial between her fingers. Why are you telling me this? Because I want your help, Jacob said simply. Not as a waitress, though you're excellent at that role. I want your perspective as someone who understands the reality of our operations, who's experienced firsthand what works and what doesn't. Someone studying business who sees systems, not just tasks. Megan stared at him, trying to process his words. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity, Jacob corrected. To help reshape how this company approaches its staff and its operations. A paid internship at corporate, with hours that accommodate your studies and childcare needs. A chance to apply what you're learning in real time, to a real business. The world seemed to tilt beneath Megan's feet. This morning, she'd been a waitress being berated for spilled coffee. Now the CEO was offering her a direct line to corporate. "Why me?" she asked, the question escaping before she could filter it. Jacob's expression softened, and he seemed to consider his next words carefully. "Professionally speaking, because in all my years building this company, I've learned one crucial truth: the people closest to the problems often have the clearest vision of the solutions. You see things I can't from my office. You understand realities I've become disconnected from." He paused, something shifting in his gaze. "And personally speaking?" Megan's heart rate quickened. "Yes. There's something about you, Megan Collins. Something I haven't encountered in a very long time." His voice lowered slightly, the professional veneer slipping. "The way you navigate this world with grace despite its challenges. The way you managed to make me feel welcome even when you were overwhelmed. The way you've created a life for your daughter despite everything working against you." He hesitated, seeming unsure whether he should continue. "I'd like to get to know you better. Outside of this professional context." Megan couldn't have been more stunned if he'd sprouted wings. "Mr. Reed." "Jacob, please." "Jacob." His name felt strange on her tongue. "I think you might be confusing gratitude with something else. You've had an emotional day too, seeing what's happening in your company." He smiled slightly. "I've been running this company for 15 years, Megan. I know the difference between professional appreciation and personal interest." His eyes held hers steadily. "But I'm also aware of the power imbalance here, which is why I'm not asking for anything. Just telling you that the opportunity I'm offering comes with no strings attached. Your career path at Reed's will be determined solely by your abilities, regardless of how you respond to my personal interest." Megan felt dizzy with the surreality of it all. Jacob Reed, billionaire, CEO, the man whose name was on the building, was essentially telling her he was attracted to her, while also offering her a career-changing opportunity. The two revelations together were almost too much to process. "I don't know what to say," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Say you'll consider the job," Jacob replied. "That's all I ask for now. The rest, well, that's entirely up to you. No pressure. No expectations." Megan looked down at the card again, tracing the embossed logo with her fingertip. "I'll consider it," she said, tucking the card carefully into her pocket. As she raised her eyes to meet his, Megan felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember: possibility. Not just the grind of survival, but the prospect of something more. A career that valued her insights. And perhaps, though she hardly dared to think it, a connection with someone who saw her, truly saw her, for the first time in years. "I'll consider it," she repeated, more firmly this time. And though she didn't specify which offer she meant, the professional one, the personal one, or both, the smile that lit Jacob's face suggested he understood completely. 3 weeks later, Megan stood outside the Reed's Diner's corporate headquarters in downtown Toronto, her reflection wavering in the glass entrance doors. She wore a modest navy pantsuit purchased from a consignment shop, her first real business attire, and clutched a leather portfolio Lily had helped her select, proudly proclaiming it what business ladies carry. The 20-story building intimidated her with its gleaming surfaces and purposeful occupants striding through the lobby. People with credentials, with degrees, with backgrounds that didn't include serving pancakes and memorizing coffee preferences. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jacob, waiting in the lobby. "Take your time." That simple acknowledgement of her nervousness, the permission to breathe before entering this new world, steadied her. Megan straightened her shoulders, adjusted her grip on the portfolio, and pushed through the door. Jacob Reed stood by the security desk, still sporting the beard from his undercover days, though now it was neatly trimmed. He'd explained that he'd kept it as a reminder of what he'd learned at the Burlington location, a visible symbol of his commitment to change. But Megan suspected there was another reason too. During their cautious, evolving relationship over the past 3 weeks, he'd admitted that the beard helped him move through the world with slightly less recognition, allowing them occasional dinners in quiet restaurants where they could talk without interruption. Those dinners had been revelatory. Jacob Reed, Billionaire CEO, was also Jacob, who had grown up in a small town near Winnipeg, who had worked his way through culinary school, who had a weak spot for science fiction novels and couldn't carry a tune to save his life. They'd been careful to keep things professional at work, their text exchanges focused on operational ideas, their meetings always in open conference rooms with clear agendas. But during those private dinners, they'd begun to explore the unusual connection that had sparked that first day in the diner. "Megan," he greeted her now, extending his hand with professional formality despite the warmth in his eyes. "Welcome to the other side of the operation." His simple welcome eased some of her tension. This wasn't charity. This wasn't about their personal connection. This was business recognizing talent and perspective, regardless of its origin. They rode the elevator to the 18th floor in companionable silence. When the doors opened, Megan's breath caught. The Reed's Diner's executive offices were nothing like she'd imagined. Instead of sterile corporate minimalism, the space echoed the warmth of the diners themselves, comfortable seating areas, walls painted in the familiar red and cream, black and white photographs showing the company's history from its humble beginnings. "Most of our executives haven't worked in an actual diner in years," Jacob explained as they walked. "I wanted the physical space to remind us daily of what we're really about." He led her to a conference room where 8 people were already seated around a large table. Megan recognized several faces from company materials: the CFO, the VP of Operations, the marketing director. Their curious gazes made her palms sweat. "Everyone," Jacob announced, "this is Megan Collins. She's joining us from the Burlington location to provide essential perspective on our operational review." He didn't introduce her as a waitress or a server. Just Megan Collins, a professional with perspective to offer. The subtle dignity of it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Megan will be splitting her time between the corporate office and field locations as we implement our new staff support initiatives. She'll report directly to me during this transition period." The meeting that followed was unlike anything Megan had experienced. Jacob outlined the comprehensive changes being implemented across all Reed's Diners locations: increased staffing levels, mandatory break periods, a complete overhaul of the management evaluation system, improved training protocols, and a new anonymous feedback channel for staff concerns. Most revolutionary was the front-line experience requirement. Every executive, including Jacob himself, would now work regular shifts in actual diner locations to maintain connection with the day-to-day realities of the business. "We've lost touch," Jacob said frankly to his leadership team. "We've been managing spreadsheets instead of people. The Burlington situation isn't an anomaly, it's a warning signal of systemic issues we've allowed to develop." Throughout the presentation, Jacob repeatedly deferred to Megan for input, treating her observations with the same weight as his executives' comments. At first, She spoke hesitantly, afraid of overstepping. But as the meeting progressed, her confidence grew. These weren't abstract problems to her, they were the daily realities she'd lived. The scheduling software maximizes labor efficiency, she explained when the topic arose, but it doesn't account for human factors. When someone calls in sick, there's no flex capacity. Everyone works at maximum output all the time, which might look good on paper but leads to burnout and mistakes. The operations VP made notes, nodding thoughtfully. After the meeting, Jacob walked Megan to a small but bright office with a window overlooking the city. A nameplate on the door read Megan Collins, Operations Consultant. Your space, he said simply. For the days you're here. Megan ran her fingers along the edge of the desk, struggling to reconcile this reality with where she'd been just weeks ago, crying in the diner's kitchen, coffee staining her uniform, Lily's science project waiting at home. I'm still not sure I understand why me, she admitted. There must be thousands of employees in your restaurants with similar experiences. Jacob leaned against the door frame, considering her question. Do you know what the difference is between a good business and a great one, Megan? She shook her head. A good business sees people as resources to be maximized. A great business sees them as individuals with unique value to contribute. He smiled slightly. I didn't choose you randomly. I saw how you handled yourself under impossible pressure. How you maintained standards when it would have been easier to let them slip. How you protected your colleagues from Rick's worst behaviors. Those qualities can't be taught in business school. He paused, his expression growing more serious. There's another reason, though. One that's perhaps more selfish. What's that? Megan asked. You remind me of why I started this company in the first place. Jacob's gaze drifted to the window, to the city beyond. Not to build an empire or make millions, but to create places where people felt valued, both customers and staff. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that founding principle. You helped me find it again. He moved closer, his voice softening. And on a more personal note, these past few weeks, getting to know you, have been the most meaningful of my recent life. You see the world with such clarity, Megan. Such honesty. It's, refreshing isn't a strong enough word. The professional boundaries they'd maintained in the office seemed to waver. Megan was acutely aware of his proximity, of the quiet intimacy of being alone in her new office. Jacob, she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. Their developing relationship existed in a strange liminal space, more than professional, less than romantic, with an attraction neither could deny but both approached with caution. I know, he said, seeming to read her hesitation. Too complicated. Too many issues of power and perception. I understand completely if you want to keep things strictly professional. Megan shook her head. It's not that. It's... I have Lily to consider. My career. My education. I can't afford complications. I would never want to complicate your life, Jacob said quietly. Only to be part of it, in whatever way makes sense for you. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep inside her. When was the last time someone had considered what she needed, rather than what they wanted from her? I'm not saying no, Megan clarified. I'm saying, slowly. Carefully. With clear boundaries between work and, whatever this is becoming. Jacob's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in that way she'd first noticed when he was just a kind customer in booth 7. Slowly and carefully sounds perfect to me. Megan absorbed his words, feeling their weight. This wasn't just a job opportunity or a remarkable stroke of luck. It was a responsibility to represent the thousands of front-line workers whose experiences mirrored her own. And perhaps, it was the beginning of something even more unexpected, a connection that defied the conventional barriers of class, wealth, and circumstance. "I won't let you down," she said quietly. Jacob smiled. "I know you won't. But that's not what worries me." "What does?" "That we'll let you down again." His expression was solemn. "That the changes we're implementing won't go far enough or last long enough. Real transformation is hard, Megan. It requires constant vigilance." She nodded, understanding completely. "Then we'll have to be vigilant together." The double meaning in her words, professional partnership, personal possibility, hung in the air between them. Jacob's eyes met hers, acknowledging it, respecting the boundaries she'd set, but recognizing the potential that existed just beyond them. "Together," he echoed, the word a promise of things yet to unfold. 6 months later, Megan stood in the wings of the conference center stage, watching Jacob Reed address the crowd of business leaders and journalists. The annual hospitality industry conference had selected him as keynote speaker not for Reed's Diner's impressive market share or profitability, but for the company's radical approach to workplace culture that had generated buzz throughout the industry. The Undercover CEO Goes Viral: How One Billionaire's Reality Check Transformed His Company. Read the Toronto Star headline that had launched the story into national consciousness. Jacob hadn't sought the publicity, but when a customer recognized him during his second undercover visit to another location, the story proved irresistible to media outlets. What began as human interest quickly evolved into serious business coverage when quarterly reports showed remarkable improvements: employee turnover down 64%, customer satisfaction up 28%, and surprisingly, profitability increasing despite higher labor costs. The conventional wisdom in food service, Jacob was saying from the podium, is that labor is a cost to be minimized. What we've discovered is precisely the opposite: that investment in people yields returns that far exceed the spreadsheet calculations. From her vantage point offstage, Megan could see the audience's reaction: skepticism from some, thoughtful consideration from others. Industry veterans who'd built careers on traditional management approaches shifted uncomfortably. Younger executives leaned forward, taking notes. The past 6 months had transformed Reed's Diners and had transformed Megan's life in ways she could never have imagined. Her role had expanded from consultant to director as her insights proved invaluable again and again. Her salary had increased accordingly, allowing her to move with Lily to a comfortable apartment closer to both the office and better schools. Her business degree was progressing faster with the tuition assistance program she'd helped design. And her relationship with Jacob had evolved too cautiously, privately, but with deepening meaning. They'd been careful to keep their personal connection separate from their professional collaboration, maintaining appropriate boundaries at work while exploring their growing feelings during private dinners, weekend outings with Lily, and quiet conversations that stretched into the night. The tabloids had speculated, of course. The wealthy CEO and the waitress turned executive made for irresistible gossip. But they'd weathered the scrutiny together, prioritizing substance over appearance, building something real beneath the public narrative. "I could share statistics with you all day," Jacob continued. "But numbers don't tell the complete story. For that, I'd like to introduce someone who's been instrumental in our transformation. A woman who experienced the worst of our previous culture and has been essential in building something better. Please welcome Megan Collins, our Director of Employee Experience." Hearing her new title still gave Megan a jolt of disbelief. The journey from waitress to director in 6 months was unprecedented, nearly unbelievable. But it hadn't been without challenges. The promotion had come with scrutiny, whispers about favoritism, questions about her qualifications, the subtle and not so subtle implications that her rise had more to do with Jacob's personal interest than her capabilities. She'd proven them wrong with results. The training program she'd developed for new managers had decreased staff complaints by 70%. The revised scheduling system she'd helped implement had improved both employee satisfaction and customer service metrics. The anonymous feedback channel she'd championed had identified and resolved dozens of issues before they became crises. Megan stepped onto the stage, the spotlight momentarily blinding. She wore a tailored burgundy suit purchased new this time, no consignment necessary with her director's salary. Her portfolio, the same one Lily had helped select, contained the presentation she'd spent weeks perfecting. As she passed Jacob, their hands brushed briefly, a small, private gesture of solidarity amid the professional setting. His eyes met hers with quiet pride and something deeper, something that had grown steadily over the months of working side by side, of learning each other's strengths and vulnerabilities, of building trust across the vast differences in their life experiences. "Thank you, Jacob," she said, her voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes fixed upon her. "6 months ago, I was a waitress at a Reed's diner in Burlington. A single mother working double shifts, taking business classes at night, and living paycheck to paycheck." She paused, allowing the contrast to register with the audience. "I wasn't looking for rescue or advancement. I was simply trying to survive in a system that seemed designed to extract maximum labor while providing minimum support. What changed wasn't just my personal circumstance, it was an entire corporate philosophy." For the next 20 minutes, Megan detailed the specific changes Reed's Diners had implemented, not in abstract terms of corporate values, but in practical policies that directly impacted daily operations. The Living Wage Initiative, the Child Care Subsidy Program, the educational partnership with local community colleges, the management training that emphasized empathy alongside efficiency. The return on these investments isn't just measured in reduced turnover or improved customer satisfaction, she concluded. It's measured in dignity. In parents able to attend their children's school events. In students completing degrees without exhaustion-induced failure. In employees who see a future with the company rather than a temporary way station to something better. As applause filled the room, Megan caught Jacob's eye. His slight nod conveyed what words couldn't: pride, yes, but also partnership. She wasn't a charity case or a token success story. She was a colleague whose perspective had proved invaluable. Later, at the reception, a reporter from the Financial Post cornered them both. "Mr. Reed," she began, recorder extended, "critics suggest your approach isn't scalable or sustainable. That once the publicity fades, market pressures will force a return to traditional labor models. Your response?" Jacob smiled slightly. "Those critics are operating on outdated assumptions about what drives profitability. Our increased labor costs have been offset by reduced turnover, improved customer loyalty, and decreased waste. The numbers speak for themselves. And Ms. Collins," the reporter continued, turning to Megan, "some industry insiders suggest your story, while inspiring, is anomalous. That most front-line workers lack the education or capability to advance as you have." Megan felt a flash of the old anger, the dismissive attitude she'd encountered throughout her life, but channeled it into measured response. "That perspective," she said carefully, reflects the very bias we're working to overcome. Capability exists at every level of an organization. The question isn't whether frontline workers have potential, it's whether companies are willing to recognize and develop it. The reporter's eyebrows raised slightly at the directness of her answer. And what would you say to those who suggest your rise has more to do with Mr. Reed's personal interest in you than your qualifications? The question hung in the air, its implication clear. The tabloid speculation about their relationship had never been so directly addressed in a professional setting. Before Meghan could respond, Jacob stepped forward. I'd invite them to review Ms. Collins' accomplishments these past 6 months. The programs she's developed have transformed our operations and improved our financial performance. If anything, she's been underpromoted given her contributions. His voice remained professional, but Meghan could see the tension in his jaw. The reporter seemed disappointed by the deflection. But you don't deny the rumors about your relationship, she pressed. Meghan exchanged a glance with Jacob. They discussed this possibility, how they would handle public questions about their private lives. The decision had always been that their personal relationship was their business alone. But standing there, facing the implication that her professional achievements were somehow diminished by their connection, Meghan made a different choice. My work stands on its own merits, she said firmly. But yes, Jacob and I have developed a personal relationship outside of work. One that began after my promotion, not before it. One based on mutual respect and shared values. She met the reporter's gaze directly. The assumption that a woman can't earn her position if she also happens to be involved with someone in leadership is precisely the kind of outdated thinking we're working to change. The reporter blinked, clearly surprised by the candid answer. And you don't worry about conflicts of interest? We've implemented clear reporting structures to address that, Jacob explained. Meghan reports to Arku, not directly to me, for all performance evaluations and compensation decisions. After the reporter moved on, Meghan exhaled slowly. I hope that was okay. Acknowledging it publicly, I mean. Jacob's expression was warm as he looked at her. More than okay. It was honest. And you were right, your work stands on its own merits. Always has, always will. He gestured toward the crowd, where several industry executives were engaged in animated discussion about Reed's new approaches. That's what matters, Meghan. Not convincing everyone immediately, but demonstrating success so convincingly that even the skeptics can't ignore it. She nodded, surveying the room with new eyes. 6 months ago, these people would have looked past her, just another server refilling water glasses. Now they sought her input, quoted her presentations, implemented her ideas. Lily asked an interesting question this morning, Meghan said. She wanted to know if I'm rich now. Jacob laughed. And what did you tell her? Meghan smiled, thinking of her daughter's face as they stood in their new apartment, still modest, but with 2 bedrooms and a small balcony where Lily had immediately installed a container garden. I told her we have everything we need, and that's a kind of richness not everyone experiences. Jacob's expression softened. She's as wise as her mother. He hesitated, then added quietly, speaking of Lily, she asked me something too, the last time we went to the Science Museum. Oh. Meghan raised an eyebrow, curious. Lily had grown fond of Jacob over the past months, delighting in his willingness to participate in her elaborate science experiments and never-ending questions. She asked if I was going to be her new dad. Jacob's voice was gentle, careful. I told her that was a very big question that needed to be discussed with her mother first. Megan's heart stuttered in her chest. They'd never explicitly discussed marriage, though their relationship had deepened considerably. "And, what would you have said? If you could have answered honestly." Jacob's eyes met hers, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen them. "I would have said that nothing would make me happier than to be her dad. And your husband. If that's something you might want to." The noise of the reception seemed to fade around them as Megan processed his words. This man who had entered her life so unexpectedly, who had seen her value when she was at her lowest, who had helped her build a new future for herself and Lily, was essentially asking if she could see a future where their lives were permanently intertwined. "It's too soon," she said softly. "And too public a place for this conversation." "You're right," Jacob agreed immediately. "I shouldn't have. But," Megan continued, a smile spreading across her face, "when you ask me properly, somewhere private, with Lily included in the moment, my answer will be yes." Jacob's expression transformed, joy breaking across his features like sunrise. He reached for her hand, squeezing it briefly before remembering their surroundings. "I'll plan accordingly," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As they circulated through the reception, Megan found herself approached by a young woman in a server's uniform, part of the catering staff for the event. "Excuse me, Ms. Collins," the woman said hesitantly. "I just wanted to say, I read about you in the newspaper. It's made me think maybe I could finish my degree too." Megan felt a tightness in her chest, recognition of her former self in this woman's uncertain hope. "What are you studying?" she asked warmly. "Accounting. But with my hours, it's been slow going." Megan reached into her pocket and withdrew a business card, her own now, with the Reed's Diners logo and her director title. "Call me," she said, pressing it into the woman's hand. "We're always looking for people who understand both the theory and the reality of this business." The woman's eyes widened slightly as she accepted the card. "Thank you," she whispered. As she walked away, Jacob appeared at Megan's side. "That looked meaningful," he observed. Megan watched the server rejoin her colleagues, carefully tucking the business card into her pocket just as Megan had done with Jacob's card 6 months earlier. "It's starting," she said simply. "The real transformation. Not just policies and procedures, but possibilities. For everyone." Jacob's fingers found hers, hidden from view between them. "Including us." Megan smiled, thinking of the journey from that first day in the diner. From exhausted waitress to respected executive, from single mother struggling alone to a woman contemplating a shared future with a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. "Especially us," she replied, the words a promise of the life they were building together, one that neither could have imagined before that fateful day when a billionaire CEO had ordered a meal at his own diner and discovered something far more valuable than he'd been seeking. What makes this story more than just a feel-good tale of unexpected opportunity lies in its deeper truths about human dignity and organizational blindness. When Jacob Reed built his restaurant empire, he started with genuine care for both customers and employees. But as success distanced him from daily operations, that founding vision became abstracted into metrics and targets. Without realizing it, he created a system that measured everything except what truly mattered, the human experience of working within his creation. Megan's journey represents not just personal triumph, but the reclamation of dignity in work. Her tears in that walk-in freezer weren't weakness, they were the natural response to a system that had forgotten the humanity of its essential workers. Her expertise wasn't developed in business school but forged in the crucible of real-world challenges, giving her insights no MBA program could provide. The love that developed between Jacob and Megan wasn't just a romantic subplot, but a metaphor for the reconciliation of worlds that capitalism too often keeps separate: the executive suite and the service floor, theory and practice, power and vulnerability. Their relationship required both to step outside their prescribed roles and see each other as fully human, a microcosm of the larger transformation needed in workplaces everywhere. The most profound lesson isn't that CEOs should occasionally work undercover, but that organizations must build permanent bridges between decision makers and frontline realities. When companies value only what can be measured on quarterly reports, they miss the intangible qualities that truly drive success: dignity, belonging, purpose, and growth. True leadership isn't about maintaining distance and control. It's about recognition, seeing the potential in others that circumstances have hidden, and creating environments where that potential can flourish. Not as charity, but as the most profound form of good business. And sometimes, in that recognition, we discover not just colleagues, but life partners who challenge us to become our best selves. This story resonates because we've all been Megan at some point, underestimated, caught in systems that seem designed to extract our labor while diminishing our humanity. And many of us have been Jacob too, blind to realities just beyond our comfortable perspective, making decisions based on incomplete understanding. The question isn't whether these dynamics exist in your workplace or business, but what you'll do about them. If you're in leadership, when was the last time you experienced your organization as your newest, least powerful employee does? If you're that employee, are you recognizing and documenting the insights your position gives you, perspectives that those above you cannot see? And beyond the workplace, this story reminds us that meaningful connections can emerge in the most unexpected circumstances. The barriers we place between ourselves and others, wealth, status, education, circumstance, are often more permeable than we imagine. True connection requires vulnerability, the courage to see and be seen beyond the roles we play. Transformation begins with recognition, seeing clearly what is, before imagining what could be. It continues with courage, the willingness to speak truth upward and listen to truth from below. And sometimes, it culminates in love that transcends the artificial boundaries we create between different kinds of people. Share this story with someone whose perspective you value but rarely seek. Ask them what they see that you might be missing. Start a conversation about dignity in your workplace, about systems that either support or diminish human potential. The greatest innovations often come not from the boardroom but from the front lines. The wisdom to transform organizations exists at every level, if only we have the courage to look, listen, and act. From exhausted waitress to respected executive, from single mother struggling alone to a woman contemplating a shared future with a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. "Especially us," she replied, the words a promise of the life they were building together, one that neither could have imagined before that fateful day when a billionaire CEO had ordered a meal at his own diner and discovered something far more valuable than he'd been seeking. What makes this story more than just a feel-good tale of unexpected opportunity lies in its deeper truths about human dignity and organizational blindness. When Jacob Reed built his restaurant empire, he started with genuine care for both customers and employees. But as success distanced him from daily operations, that founding vision became abstracted into metrics and targets. Without realizing it, he created a system that measured everything except what truly mattered, the human experience of working within his creation. Megan's journey represents not just personal triumph, but the reclamation of dignity in work. Her tears in that walk-in freezer weren't weakness, they were the natural response to a system that had forgotten the humanity of its essential workers. Her expertise wasn't developed in business school but forged in the crucible of real-world challenges, giving her insights no MBA program could provide. The love that developed between Jacob and Megan wasn't just a romantic subplot, but a metaphor for the reconciliation of worlds that capitalism too often keeps separate, the executive suite and the service floor, theory and practice, power and vulnerability. Their relationship required both to step outside their prescribed roles and see each other as fully human, a microcosm of the larger transformation needed in workplaces everywhere. The most profound lesson isn't that CEOs should occasionally work undercover, but that organizations must build permanent bridges between decision makers and frontline realities. When companies value only what can be measured on quarterly reports, they miss the intangible qualities that truly drive success: dignity, belonging, purpose, and growth. True leadership isn't about maintaining distance and control. It's about recognition, seeing the potential in others that circumstances have hidden, and creating environments where that potential can flourish. Not as charity, but as the most profound form of good business. And sometimes, in that recognition, we discover not just colleagues, but life partners who challenge us to become our best selves. This story resonates because we've all been Megan at some point, underestimated, caught in systems that seem designed to extract our labor while diminishing our humanity. And many of us have been Jacob too, blind to realities just beyond our comfortable perspective, making decisions based on incomplete understanding. The question isn't whether these dynamics exist in your workplace or business, but what you'll do about them. If you're in leadership, when was the last time you experienced your organization as your newest, least powerful employee does? If you're that employee, are you recognizing and documenting the insights your position gives you, perspectives that those above you cannot see? And beyond the workplace, this story reminds us that meaningful connections can emerge in the most unexpected circumstances. The barriers we place between ourselves and others, wealth, status, education, circumstance, are often more permeable than we imagine. True connection requires vulnerability, the courage to see and be seen beyond the roles we play. Transformation begins with recognition, seeing clearly what is, before imagining what could be. It continues with courage, the willingness to speak truth upward and listen to truth from below. And sometimes, it culminates in love that transcends the artificial boundaries we create between different kinds of people. Share this story with someone whose perspective you value but rarely seek. Ask them what they see that you might be missing. Start a conversation about dignity in your workplace, about systems that either support or diminish human potential. The greatest innovations often come not from the boardroom but from the front lines. The wisdom to transform organizations exists at every level, if only we have the courage to look, listen, and act. What workplace reality needs your recognition today? And what connections might be waiting for you, just beyond the comfortable boundaries of your current perspective?